Well, folks, thanks for coming. It's super nice to be back at the DroidKaigi after so many years. I was actually speaking, I believe it was during Corona, in the online session, but this is the first one in person since, I believe it was 2018 or 19. So I'm super happy to meet the Japanese community again. And my session is going to be about Android open source repositories, how to manage them, things that you should take into consideration when you're open sourcing a library, automation, licensing, these sort of things. A bit of context about me. I'm an Android Kotlin Google developer expert. I run the Kotlin Weekly. If you don't know, it is a mailing list similar to the Android Weekly that I send on Sundays with a lot of news about the Kotlin world and, well, everything that is happening. And this is my Twitter handle if you want to follow me. I work as a contractor, so I'm mostly doing Kotlin for Android, Kotlin for backend, some Kotlin multi-platform, some iOS from time to time. Yeah, I'm going to tell you my story on open source repositories, things I learned, and I hope you can learn one or two new things today. So a bit of context. This is my dashboard in the Google Developer Expert program. Since I started in 2013 or 14, well, I have been speaking at a few conferences, running workshops, and writing articles. And some of the things that I have been doing are open source development. Just as a disclaimer, most of those things happened before the kid. Now I have a baby, and it's really hard to put time after work on open source or like free contributions, but I still try my best. And it's going to contain a bit of a personal journey. There are some learnings here that they work out for me. It's how I did things, but you always need to put them in perspective and see how to make them fit into your lifestyle and career and things that you like. So for me, there was a first time to get into open source, into the open source world. This was in, my first contribution was in 2011. And what I developed was an exploit for WhatsApp. Back in time, WhatsApp was, I think not only WhatsApp, to be honest, was pretty much every single Android app. It was not very secure, so I realized that WhatsApp was storing a backup of all the conversations into the SD card with no type of security. There was no key to encrypt them. At some point, they added an encryption key, but this encryption key used as a seed the phone number, so it was the same as not having anything. As long as you know the phone number, you could guess the encryption key and, well, encrypt the conversations. As you know, on the SD card, everybody can access them, right? Like every external app could go to the SD card, find this database that was encrypted or not encrypted, take it somehow, and read the content inside it. So I developed an exploit that was, as a proof of concept, obviously, I didn't want to make this vector attack possible, but I was contacting WhatsApp. They didn't write me back. I wrote a few articles. And what I developed was a script that was running a process on the background, was taking these conversations, and were sending them per email to the email that you specified. So you needed only the read external storage, the internet permission, and that's it. Back in time, Google also didn't have that many security controls on the store, so it was a big security hole. Well, after I published the store, the script in this repository from here, WhatsApp minus conversation minus burglar, it was taken down by a DMCA communication from WhatsApp. So pretty much WhatsApp wrote GitHub. They said, we don't want this thing. It's violating our copyright and image, blah, blah, blah. And it was removed. But I believe you might be able to find some in the internet what this was doing. Anyway, why sharing those things? Why sharing in general when we are working on open source code? One of the things I like besides coding is investing and finance. And in the finance world, there are two types of companies, the blue ocean companies and the red ocean companies. The red ocean companies are those that work in a limited world, so you get money by stealing customers from other companies. You make money by putting prices down, well, it's a world that doesn't grow. It's just the same amount of market and people, and you just need to be very aggressive on your techniques. Companies like this can be telecommunication companies. So in the United States, like AT&T and Verizon, they pretty much don't grow that much. Whereas blue ocean companies are, well, companies that can grow, can create new markets, competition is irrelevant. Typical examples are the technological companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, etc. So those companies, still there is certain level of competition, but you don't base your market growth and company valuation on this competition, but in creating new products, new markets, new concepts, and making the competition irrelevant. I think this combines well with the open source world and the open source mentality that I like, which, if you think about it, you could think, well, why, if I create my open source repository and I publish it for free, people are going to download it and they're not going to pay me and I'm not going to get any money. And that's the red ocean mentality. Whereas the blue ocean mentality, it's different. Could be, I publish my work, people are going to check my work, they will get a benefit from it. And as a side effect of this, I will get a benefit as well, because, well, people will know me, they will use my product, this can help me later to find other jobs or start my own company or get clients or even getting commission to work on, like other, your own open source project or different ones. This is my my GitHub profile. I was working on a few repositories. So you can see in Android specifically, I think there are two that I started. One is the Android stack blur. Performs a blur operation on an image and using 3 different methods. Using Java, the library is very old, using C++, and using render script. Whereas sweepable cards is the Tinder card interface, right? You have cards, you can dismiss them left, right, and then you have a listener that notifies you. Actually, Android stack blur is very deprecated because I believe in Android 12 or 13, there is a method that allows you to blur the image, to blur a view directly. So this might not make a lot of sense now, but anyway. Those are the libraries. I just started them. I think they had some traction. I got some external contributions. I got some people adding features, issues, and I was very happy because I saw that I'm sleeping and somebody else is getting a benefit from this. And talking about side effects, I actually got 2 contracting gigs for Android stack blur from companies that wanted to implement it into their products, and well, they wanted me to develop an ad hoc solution. So I think this is an example of the blue ocean mentality. Then another example of the blue ocean mentality. I have been working at Google on a few of the open source libraries that they handle. Google Places SDK, Maps SDK for the Android utility library, and Maps Compose. So if you go to the repository, it's open source, so you can see all the contributions. And this, I think it was an example also of this blue ocean mentality. By, being very active in the open source community, at some point I got in touch with some folks from Google. I was contributing to the repositories, and there was a contracting opportunity which I took in. And here there are 2 more examples of libraries that I have been working with. One of them is YCharts. It's a Jetpack Compose chart library. So if you're in Android, you probably know MPP chart. Is a very old chart library that is using Java. Is not using Compose, it's rendering everything on a canvas, and it has not been updated in like 4 years. So if you want to integrate it into your application, there might be some issues with the Android Gradle plugin, with the dependencies that this library is using. So this library solves this problem. And YChat, it's a Kotlin multi-platform library that interfaces with ChatGPT, the API from OpenAI, and the Vertex API from Google. It provides a multi-platform screen similar to a chat, like in WhatsApp or Line or Telegram, where you can ask questions to ChatGPT API. So this can be integrated in an application if you want to have an assistant or if you want to have any sort of AI integration. Now, let's talk about licensing. That's probably the most important aspect when we are developing open source software, because if we choose the wrong license, we might be forcing the folks integrating the library to adopt a certain license. We might be losing some rights or providing some rights that we don't want to provide, so this is a key thing. There are many licenses, a lot. But I think in the open source world, the three more important ones are these three here, the GPL3, Apache 2.0, and MIT. So GPL. GPL requires that derivative works must be distributed under the same license. This means that if you take a GPL library and you fork it, this needs to be GPL. But not if you integrate it in your application. If you take a GPL library and integrate the library into your application, that's perfectly fine. It can be proprietary software. It requires the source code to be available. So if you publish something under GPL, you cannot keep the source code as a secret. It needs to be on GitHub or somehow needs to be provided. There is a strong copyleft protection, encourages the contribution back to the open source community, and users are free to modify, distribute, do whatever they want with the software as long as they are respecting the GPL license. This is the most, you could say, hippie one license. So it's, the most open source extreme, and for some folks might not be recommended to integrate in a real app. MIT is a permissive license that allows you commercial use, modification, distribution, private usage, etc. It requires you to include the original copyright notice and disclaimers in all the copies from the software. This is something that I think doesn't happen all the time, right? If you have an Android application and you include an MIT library, you need to have this about section that includes a list of all the MIT licenses. It does not require derivative works to be licensed under MIT, so you could fork an MIT library and make it proprietary if you want, and is flexible enough to be adapted by proprietary and closed source projects. Apache is very similar to MIT, almost the same. Probably the biggest difference is that it provides protection for code patents. I'm not sure about Japan, but in the United States, patenting source code can be a thing. You can get a patent over an algorithm, over a specific library or piece of code. And with Apache 2.0, you can do this. You can include, if you want, this thing within your library, and it's still protected by a patent. So generally, Apache 2.0 is the one that is mostly used in the open source world. If you go to check most of the libraries in Android, like OK, HTTP, Retrofit, most of the libraries from Square, JetBrains, they are licensed under Apache 2.0. So as a summary, GPL, it's the super open source hippie license. It's generally bad for derivative works since they need to use the same license. And of course, if you run a company, you might not want to be doing this. MIT, it's very flexible, allows you to use it in commercial products, allows you to use it in open source products, flexible enough, but it does not offer copyleft protection. And so yeah, things like patents and everything are not covered by Apache 2.0. And Apache is super similar to MIT, but is mostly helping you to protect things like patents and provide certain copyleft protection. So as a rule of thumb, if you're developing an Android library, you're probably better under Apache 2.0. More things that we need to have: contribution guidelines. Contribution guidelines will govern how people contribute and talk with the repository. I like these guidelines from here. Generally, I use them in all my projects. If you go to opensource.google.com/conduct, you will find the contribution guidelines from Google. There are a few more things in this page that I recommend you to check. And if you actually add them on GitHub in a file called guidelines.md, guidelines, a markdown file, every time a person makes a first contribution, there will be an animation telling them that, hey, did you check these contribution guidelines? Is your first contribution? You should check them out. So this is going to help them to know exactly how they should do things. So as a rule of thumb, the contribution guidelines, they will tell you that you should have a respectful behavior and a few more things. So But well, don't be like Linus Torvalds, right? You know he's, has a very strong personality, but it's probably a guy that is hard to work with him. There is, in fact, this Linus runs repository that uses natural language classifier to find out the runs that this guy is having. If you go to some of the contributions that he has on the Linux open source, he's like, hey, you motherfucker, you don't do this anymore, or I'm going to kick your ass, or anything. So that's not how we like to do things. Generally, we want to make a welcome community and make people feel comfortable while they're contributing. Typical things that we are going to include is how to find issues. Are we tagging issues? Do we need to include anything anytime we create a new issue? How do we search for them? How do we get started with the project? Do we need to set up anything on our environment? Do we need to have any external dependency, etc.? Submitting pull requests. You know, sometimes we want to have a branching mechanism, like following this fit, fix, etc. Do we need to create an issue before opening a pull request? And having a clear README file. Again, using the one from Google as a basic example, it's a good start, but you might want to create your own or do some modifications on that one. To create a README, consider something like the one from TensorFlow. TensorFlow is one of the top open source projects on GitHub. At some point has been the top 1, top 2, top 3, depending on the metrics. But I think it's a really good example. It includes a lot of nice things that we should be adding to our repository. You can go to github.com/TensorFlow and you'll be able to see it. They have things like installing or getting started. TensorFlow obviously has more things. It's a multi-platform project, not only supported Android, so they include things like how to set up Python and the dependencies that we need to install. Generally, in Android, we don't need those things, but sometimes we need to include other dependencies, right? Or we need to make sure that we are targeting at least a given version of the Android framework, or that you need to use this AGP plugin, or this, we're using this thing that in Kotlin starts in Kotlin 1.4 or whatever. It's a really good first space. It doesn't conflict with having later on documentation, but as developers, sometimes you don't go to the website to check documentation or to the GitHub pages. Our first point of contact is the README markdown file. We can also add here an excerpt from the contribution guidelines, or even link them from here for the same reason. The contribution guidelines, if they're in a different file, are not likely always to be opened by a potential developer integrating them. So if we can help our users to find them, it's always a very nice step. Then having the build status. Sometimes, again, the TensorFlow, it's a little bit more special, but we could have things like reflecting the build status from our application, right? Sometimes we might have like different build types or different artifacts, and we would like to reflect from here if things are working out or not. And further resources. Anything that is related to your app that folks should check, such as examples, a blog, articles in Medium, anything can go here at the end on a resourcing section. ProWare or R8? How many people here have had crashes because you forget to add your ProWare file? Can you raise your hand? So it happens very often, right? That you integrate a library, everything is working when you develop on your debug build, and then when you generate the production one, crashes, what's happening, class not found. Well, we need to add the ProWare setup here. I think it's something that is very easy to forget, and it's sometimes hard to identify because it doesn't happen until we actually activate ProWare, which is in the release version. So make sure that you have here a couple of lines with the ProWare configuration that your library needs. Consider using the code as a documentation. That means that the documentation should not be static pages that are uploaded somewhere else. The code should also be documented. In the case of Android, we can use Kdoc. Kdoc uses the Javadoc syntaxes. It's actually not a tool to generate the HTML pages. It's the tool to write the documentation itself. What you can use to generate the documentation is Docker. Both of them are Kotlin first, Kotlin friendly, written in Kotlin, and I think are probably the standard today when working with Android open source code. Of course, Javadoc if you want, and using the Java utility to generate it, but might be a bit old in 2023. You could also consider the documentation as a website. A good example in Android is Dagger. If you have been using Dagger, now maybe a little bit superseded by Hilt, but they have their own website where they explain how to make, how to use Dagger, and they showcase this example of the coffee machine and the, well, how different pieces are different and stuff. Again, you might need to check how this works on your project, but it's generally a good example. At least the kdoc or doka or the javadoc file should be uploaded in an external repository. Actually, you can do it on javadoc.io. It's similar to Maven and sort of an open source platform for to upload Javadoc documentation. It's very easy to set up from your GitHub repository. If you actually go to Android-maps-compose, one of the libraries that I was working with, you can see an automation script that generates the documentation and uploads it into javadoc.io. So every time that you generate a new version, the documentation is updated. Now, which guidelines should we use? This is important because if everybody is using different, like tab versus spaces or different patterns, it's going to be a mess, the code, and every contribution is going to be changing the style. I think today, as a general rule of thumb, we should be using the Android Studio standard guidelines. So don't try to reinvent the wheel and come up with the standard things, because most of the folks don't load Android Studio, use Android Studio, and are going to be using the template from Android Studio. So consider using those guidelines for code. Automation of dependencies. We can be using, there are two mechanisms that are using today. One of them is RenovateBot, and the other one is Dependabot. They take care of your dependencies. They update the dependencies of your library every time there is something new coming up, like a new Kotlin version or a new retrofit version or whatever, and you don't need to individually check them. Renovate is an app that you need to install on your GitHub, so it's a little bit different. And Dependabot is a configuration file that you need to add, something like dependabot.yml. And then automatically, every time there is a new version of your library, they will make pull requests that you need to approve and check and set up. RenovateBot is more flexible. You can allow things like auto-merge dependencies. You can batch them. So something like make a pull request for this entire group, something like everything related to Android Compose or to Android Material. And Dependabot is more simple. Dependabot just finds new versions, makes a PR, but I think it's a fantastic way to keep your open source repository up to date without, well, you having to individually check everything. Now, semantic versioning. There is a bot called Semantic Release that allows you to have the automated version management and package publishing following semantic versioning approach. If you are including, well, based on the things that you're including, like fixes, new features, chores, documentation, Semantic Release will take care of increasing your version number, the minor one, the major one, a bump. You can also set up a Semantic Release to say, like, if there is a feature, you're going to increase the major number. If there is a feature that includes an exclamation, like fit exclamation on the commit message, is going to mark it as a breaking change, these sort of things. And this helps a lot to manage automatically all the releases. You don't need to manually go anymore and create a tag and push the tag. Semantic versioning will take care of doing this for you. So it's also very convenient. This is a configuration file, might not be super visible here. I'll share the slides anyway on Twitter and send them to the organizers. But it uses this semantic mechanism where you can prefix commits with a build or chore or fit, and based on this, semantic versioning will decide whether the release needs to happen or not. We can have bots for inclusive language. So we have this GitHub bot from here that checks if we are following an inclusive language approach on our commits and documentation and etc. And well, posts on our pull requests and make sure that, well, we are following an inclusive language approach. Grammar, again, we have the Prosebot that takes care of all our grammar the grammar mistakes that we might be doing and notifies you before things get actually merged. So it's for us non-English speakers very convenient. Detect, I guess many of you have experience with Detect and other lint frameworks. You can combine Detect also with Link and other ones, but I like Detect specifically. I think it's, well, you can also create your new rules and it's very flexible. And Detect makes sure that you are not, well, introducing new bugs or potential leaks or issues by checking things on when the pull request is created. Now, you should be considering tags. You can create those labels on GitHub for things like every time, things like, well, if I like to do things like priority. Depends on your repository, right? If how many people are working there, is this managed by a company or not? But a tag is very helpful because if you're getting many issues, you can very easily categorize them and triage them. So if you think that everything that is affecting now I don't know, my core module then needs to have this priority or anything, makes all the open source management much easier. You can tag them with welcome for first-time users or needs help or etc. and, well, distribute better your work between all the folks contributing. Every code review should have automated linting and automated testing. That means the moment a pull request is created, our lint should start, our test should run, and this cannot be merged unless both of them are passing. Of course, lint sometimes give us some warnings that are not very real or you don't want to have them. You can always ignore them with a suppress warning tag. But as a rule of thumb, no lint warnings or, of course, errors should get into our code base. This is how a GitHub action looks like. So in this case, when we make a contribution, we can have a GitHub action that makes something like on pull request created. You can set up if on GitHub actions things like every time you create a pull request, every time you push a tag, every time something gets published, etc. What to do. So you should do on pull request something like running all the tests, running all the lint, and here you can see that all the steps that have been happening, when you click in one of them, this will expand and you will be able to see exactly all the Gradle commands that are running. Fastlane, well, it's you can probably use it. It's going to depend a lot of the things that you want to do. I think at some point it was very used for iOS and Android, and Fastlane allows you things like taking also screenshots and publishing directly on the store. If you have, for example, a demo app, so I think it's a good DevOps or CI/CD framework. Code owners. If you haven't used this before, you can activate it from GitHub. You need to go to your settings project, branches, require review from code owners, and you will need a file where you called code owners, where you add the username of the code owners that is going to have this repository. You can also separate them between folders, so this code owner should take care of this folder or this other one. And every time you create a PR, they will be automatically assigned and they need to approve it. So yeah, for release management, you should consider semantic release. Sometimes you want it, sometimes you don't. One of the interesting things here is that it's not there is no silver bullet for everything. You need to see exactly what suits you better. But I think this is a good way of removing all the problems of having to manually upload things into Maven. Talking about Maven. Uploading into Maven is fairly easy. You can use a script like this one from here, where you specify your group ID, artifact ID. Ultimately, you need to go to Maven and release, but this can also be automated if you want. Also, something that I have found out that maybe in Germany, because well, people there have a lot of restrictions sometimes of using software or network, etc. But you could upload your release into GitHub itself. So here you can see that the version 2.0 of White Charts was uploaded. There is a description with everything that was included, and you have access to the source code and any binaries that you need. And yeah, this would be the GitHub code that allows you to publish into the GitHub action that allows you to publish in GitHub. You just need to, every time you push a tag, this will start building the app, and you need to specify the Maven username, the Maven password, and then it automatically publishes it. So I think we're slowly going to the end. So I would like just to give you a small summary of some of the things that I talk about today. So yeah, license. For open source repositories, you probably want to consider Apache 2.0. Don't forget to have a contribution guideline. Again, contribution guidelines.markdown, and this will be automatically added to your GitHub repository. README, you need to have a README file that is clear and that contains all the information about how to run the app, how to contribute, etc. Documentation, you should be considering the documentation as in the code and documentation as standalone documentation, meaning you will be publishing it into an external repository. Code styling, probably today you want to stick with Android Studio style instead of creating your own. Automate all the things. As many things as you can automate, the much better. So things like linting, testing, publishing, uploading the documentation, etc. Code reviews. The code reviews should be also governed by lint and testing, and you should be considering code owners, especially if your repository grows. Everything would need a proper review. With code owners, you can also assign like 2 folks at least per PR, per module, etc. And that's a decision that you always need to take based on the amount of contributors that you have, the amount of people that will be maintaining the libraries, and and automatic publishing. I can stress enough how useful this is. I have been before doing always the automatic publishing, so every time I wanted to publish something, I push a tag or do it manually, and then I go to Maven and click and get everything released. But having the automatic publishing using the semantic versioning bot, or there are a few other bots, is amazing because you don't need to anymore. When you are doing it manually, sometimes you forget things and make mistakes. This thing will remove a lot of the mistakes that you will probably make. You generally want to batch a few PRs, and when they're merged, you make the fit typically, or the breaking change, and things get uploaded automatically. So this has been everything from my side. I hope that at least you learn one new thing. If that happened, I would be super satisfied. I would like you to, if you have some time, to give me some feedback. I actually wanted to order some copies of a book I wrote, Living by the Code, but it was not going to arrive on time, and I'm coming back to Vietnam on Saturday. So unfortunately, I cannot bring the physical ones. But what I can do, if you give me some feedback with your email, I'll send you a PDF copy of the book. I'm not sure if my publisher will allow that, but don't tell anyone. Anyway, that has been everything. You've been a fantastic public. I believe I will have office hours after it, so if you have any question and you want to chat, feel free to drop by. Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you very much.